Have you ever wondered what happens when someone decides not to remain silent? When they choose to walk a path alone, defying everything and everyone? This is the story of a girl who, despite being ignored, made choices that changed her destiny, all thanks to a secret legacy left by someone who believed in her. In a world where answers were elusive, she went looking for them, and what she found along the way will make you question the true power of love, courage, and discovery. It's not just about inheritance. It's about writing your own story and, finally, being understood. Want to know how that happens? When the will was read, my parents smiled as the lawyer handed Vanessa a check for $10 million. Then they turned to me and said, "Go earn your own money." I didn't cry, nor did I flinch. I just stared at the polished table, trying not to listen to the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. And then something changed. An older man in a gray suit stood up. "There's one more document," he said, opening a worn envelope in my grandfather's handwriting. My mother's smile faded. My father's fingers curled into fists. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. That changed everything. It was the beginning of a storm that would shatter all the carefully constructed lies. And it all began in a place I hadn't seen in over a year. My grandfather's ranch, just outside Charleston. Once, the wind there had been a symbol of security. Now, it seemed to carry the weight of many secrets. I hadn't been back to the ranch since last spring, before my grandfather died. It was strange how something so familiar could feel so distant. The gravel crunched under my boots as I got out of the car, and the wind chimes on the porch, which had once been the soundtrack to summer afternoons and tea brewing on the windowsill, now rang hollow, echoes of something lost. I hesitated before knocking. The white paint on the door was chipped, as usual. The magnolias still leaned slightly to the east. But I didn't feel welcome. When the door creaked open, there wasn't silence as I'd expected. Instead, I heard, "So you finally decided to show up." My grandmother's voice didn't change. It still had that sharp, glass-cutting tone. Her arms were crossed, her jaw set like stone. I froze, trying to find any emotion on her face. Heat, relief, confusion. But there was only coldness. "Grandma, what's going on?" I asked, stepping closer. "They said you were too busy, that you didn't want to be disturbed, that you had a new life." Her voice wavered, but then hardened again. "Your grandfather called for you every day on his deathbed. He asked for you." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "That's not true," I said. "I tried calling. I came in March. Vanessa was here. She said no one was home." Grandma looked at me with narrowed eyes. "We were here. We've always been here." There was a painful pause. Then she turned and walked into the house without a word. I followed her. The air inside was thicker, as if the walls were holding their breath. She returned holding a worn leather notebook. "This is the number he called," she said, handing it to me. I recognized her handwriting instantly, square and elegant, with a hint of a slant. "But the page number isn't mine," I said. "Grandma, that's not my number. Not even close. I've had the same one since college." She looked at the notepad, frowning. "They said you changed, that you didn't want to be tracked, that you were embarrassed of us." "No," I said, leaning against the wall. "They lied to you. They separated me from you on purpose." Her hands were shaking. She sank slowly into the old armchair beside the fireplace, as if her knees had given out. "They said the funeral was at noon," she whispered. "I got to the church and it was empty." She looked up, her face pale. "The funeral was at 9, she said softly. "They told everyone you didn't show up, that you didn't care." My breath caught. I would never have missed his funeral. Never. The room was silent for a moment. Too quiet. And then I felt like a crack had formed in the dam. My chest tightening. My vision blurring. I sank down beside her, holding her hand like a child. "I didn't know," I said. "I didn't even know he was sick until it was too late." Her voice softened, her hand brushing mine. "Now we know the truth. And that's what matters." We stood there for a while. The silence wasn't awkward. but heavy, thick with everything left unsaid. The old clock on the shelf ticked louder than I remembered. Outside, the wind picked up, blowing dry leaves across the porch like restless memories. Finally, Grandma stood. Her hands trembled a little, but there was fire in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. "I'll call them," she said. "Call who?" She didn't answer right away. She walked over to the old rotary phone on the kitchen wall, the one her grandfather had refused to replace, and began dialing. Each click seemed deliberate, like the punctuation of a sentence she'd longed to write. I watched her fingers, weathered but steady and resolute. When the line connected, her voice became cold and clipped. "Betty, I need you, Jacob and Vanessa. Here now." There was a muffled protest in the receiver, but she hung up quickly. "No, this can't wait. I'll be there in an hour," she said, hanging up without a goodbye. Then she turned to me. "The lawyer is also arriving." I blinked. "Grandpa's lawyer?" She nodded. "Yes, your grandfather. He left some instructions, but he made it clear that they can only be read in the presence of everyone." I said nothing. I didn't need to. I just nodded. For the next hour, I sat at the small kitchen table, running my finger along the edge of the wood. That table, the same one where my grandfather had his breakfast, reading the science journals I sent him from college, the place where he first asked me about my communications degree, where I told him I wanted to study plant memory. He didn't laugh. I looked around the kitchen. The curtains were still there. The old refrigerator hummed, just the same. But the air was different. Footsteps on the porch. The doorbell rang. Grandma put her hand on my shoulder. "Stay here. I'll let you know when it's time." From the kitchen, I could hear the voices arriving one by one. My mother's sweet voice. My God, what a horrible smell. Everything looks exactly the same. My father's calm voice. "I thought this was already taken care of," he said. Vanessa's sigh. Of contempt. "Seriously. Couldn't this have waited until the estate was settled?" Then silence. And Grandma's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Please, have a seat. Mr. Harold Keene is on his way. He'll be reading Walter's final instructions." I could imagine their expressions. Confused, curious, a little irritated. They didn't know I was there. They didn't know what was about to happen. And neither did I. But deep down, I hoped that, just once, someone would say out loud what I'd always known deep down. That what they were doing wasn't love. That the silence, the exclusion, and the manipulation weren't misunderstandings. They were choices. The door creaked again. I heard a new voice, firm and professional. "The lawyer's. It won't take long," he said. "But it has to be done right." That was my cue. Grandma's voice called, "Clare, come in now." I stood up, my heart pounding. As I passed through the kitchen and into the living room, 3 gazes turned to me. Wide eyes, expressions that suddenly fell. My mother's smile froze. My father's jaw tightened. Vanessa's face paled. The air went still, as if the electricity had gone out of the room. It wasn't just surprise I saw. It was dread. The 3 of them stood there, speechless. My mother blinked, as if she'd seen a ghost. My father adjusted the collar of his shirt, a nervous tick I hadn't seen in years. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. It felt like someone had snatched the script from her hands. Mid-presentation, I kept my back straight. If they thought I was going to shrink, they were going to be disappointed. Grandma gestured to an empty chair across from them. I sat down slowly, catching my breath. Mr. Keene, the lawyer, gave me a quick, polite nod, but his expression was unreadable. Then he opened his leather briefcase and removed a thick brown envelope. "This," he began, "is the will of Walter R. Wittmann, recorded and sealed at your request." He turned the page. In addition to the official will, he left a handwritten letter to be read aloud. No one spoke. He cleared his throat and began to read. "To my wife, Margaret Whitman." His grandmother didn't react. I leave her the family ranch, the house, and sufficient funds for her comfort and care. She knows how to find rest. He turned another page. To my granddaughter, Clare Whitman. The room seemed to shrink. I felt it. I leave the Whitman Research Annex, located at 317 Laurel Creek Road, Charleston, including all laboratory equipment, funding accounts, active research patents, and intellectual property registered under Whitman Innovation. The sigh wasn't mine. My mother's eyes turned to Vanessa. I kept my hands clasped together. Mr. Keene continued, and finally, the remainder of my estate, financial holdings, stocks, and retirement funds will be divided equally between my two granddaughters, Clare and Vanessa Whitman. There it was, a bomb, quiet and elegant. But the explosion came right after. Vanessa jumped to her feet. Her chair scraped against the floor with a clatter. "What?" she spat, pointing at the annex. "All of it? The entire facility?" Her voice cracked. "This is crazy. You told me." She looked at her parents, trembling. "You said everything would be fine. He told me that if I kept visiting him, if I smiled and was nice, it would all come to me." My father's lips tightened, but he said nothing. My mother stared at the floor, as if willing it to open up and swallow its own. Wait. I just stood there, watching everything fall apart. Mr. Keene calmly raised his hand. "There's more." Mr. Whitman also wrote a personal letter to Clare, which he asked to be read aloud in this room, in front of the family. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh, but no one joined in. Her grandmother handed her a folded letter she'd taken from the drawer next to her. "He wrote this the week before he died," she said. "He made me promise." The lawyer unfolded the letter slowly, careful, not to tear the crumpled paper. My grandfather's handwriting was large and confident, filling the page. "To my dear Clare," Mr. Keene began to read. "If this is being read, then I am no longer by your side, but my faith in you remains, stronger than ever." Those words hit me like a warm wind through an open window. You were always the quiet one, the observer, the thinker, the one who asked why, when others didn't care. Vanessa sank into her chair. My mother's fingers twisted in her lap. My father looked out the window. "You built your own truth in a family that never knew how to honor yours." Something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge, but recognition. You were never a mistake. You were the legacy I was most proud of. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. I wanted everyone to hear every word. Every word. Mr. Keene's voice remained steady, even as the weight of the words altered the air in the room. "I saw you clutch that little notebook when you were 7, recording how long it took for raindrops to fill a glass. I saw your face light up when you discovered patterns, while everyone else saw only distractions." My chest tightened. I remembered the notebook. I still had it. He continued, "I saw your joy diminish when your mother dismissed you. How your father changed the subject every time you shared something you were proud of. I heard my mother take a deep breath. I didn't look at her. Vanessa was easier for them. The letter continued. She shone in ways they understood. But you, Clare, you shone in ways they couldn't translate. And instead of learning your language, they ostracized you." Vanessa shifted in her chair, her arms folded tightly. "I don't entirely blame her. She simply played the role she was given. But you wrote your own role. And that, my dear, takes courage." A tear rolled down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. "I remember the day you won your first science fair and asked me to hide the trophy. You said, maybe if I don't show it, they'll stop looking at me like I'm someone else's daughter." A low, painful exhale escaped from somewhere across the room. Maybe my father. "You deserved celebration, Clare, not invisibility. And while I can't undo the damage, I can give you something that's entirely yours. A place to build, free, without excuses, without your shadows." Mr. Keene paused, calmly folding the letter. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged with memory, resentment, and something new. Clarity. I cleared my throat. I remember that science fair, I said softly, breaking the tension. Mom didn't come. She was at Vanessa's rehearsal. Vanessa shivered. I went home holding that trophy like it was some kind of sin. Finally, my father said, Claire, this is not the time to dwell on the past. No, I said, my voice becoming higher pitched. It's the only time, because all I got from any of you was, why can't you be more like your sister? I turned to Vanessa. And you? Every time I tried to be proud of something, you turned it into a threat. She scoffed. Oh, come on. You always played the victim. I worked for what I got. I nodded. You mean you visited Grandpa when it was convenient? You smiled when asked. You said the right words because... Vanessa looked at me with hardened eyes. And what do you think you're doing? Do you think you're that pure? She stood, her voice rising. You disappeared for years. I interrupted her. No, I didn't leave. I was pushed away. You told Grandma I didn't want to see her. You gave Grandpa the wrong number and made sure I'd never get his texts. That's not distance. That's erasure. My mother stood up abruptly. Enough, Claire. You're distorting everything. Grandmother interrupted her firmly. This family has been living a lie, and I've allowed it to happen for far too long. My mother was stunned, speechless. No, she murmured. I watched you all ignore Claire's pain, Grandma continued, her voice deepening. I believed you when you said she didn't care. I should have known better. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Claire had her education, the lab camps, the travels. That wasn't free. No, I said, without raising my voice. But you didn't pay for any of it. Grandpa paid. Every perfume, every bag he got me, the flights, the newspapers. You didn't even know where I went most of the time. My voice cracked. You made me feel like a burden. He made me feel seen. Vanessa stood up, furious. This is ridiculous. They told me I would get everything. I was the good daughter. No, I replied calmly. You were the chosen one. I was the invisible one. But Grandpa didn't forget me. And now you can't erase me anymore. Vanessa's face contorted. Why should you get anything? Just because you're a sad genius in a lab coat? I smiled slightly. No, I deserve something because I earned his love honestly. And that's what you never understood. Love isn't a performance. Grandma stood up then, walking purposefully to the center of the room. I'm sorry Walter left you something, she said, looking directly at Vanessa. You may have played the part, but it was never love. It was a transaction. And I'm ashamed I didn't see it sooner. She turned to all of us. Now get out. You're not welcome here. My mother choked. But, out, the grandmother shouted again. Now. They didn't move immediately. Then Vanessa grabbed her bag and left, her heels, clicking against the floor like gunshots. My parents followed behind, stunned and muttering about legal challenges. And for the first time in my life, they couldn't take anything. The door closed behind them, without a bang, just with the feeling of something final. I stood there for a moment, unsure how to react. The room was quiet now. No tension, no explosion, just free. Grandma walked past me and slowly sat down on the couch. Her hands, which had been shaking just before, now rested, calmly in her lap. They'll be back, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They always do. Maybe, she replied. But this time we don't have to let them in. It took a while for this to sink in. For so long I had operated under a silent contract. If I was good enough, if I achieved enough, if I was useful, maybe I would be seen. Maybe they would call me daughter, sister, part of the family, without hesitation. But standing there, in that room, with the echo of my grandfather's words, still floating in the air, I realized something painfully simple. I was trying to win the love of people who never had anything to give me. And Grandpa, he'd seen it long before I did. "I need air," I said, my voice cracking a little. Grandma nodded, and I stepped out onto the back porch. The boards creaked beneath my feet, a sound that once meant home. Now, it meant change. The magnolias still bloomed in the corner. Beyond the fence, the same red dirt field where Grandpa once let me build my first greenhouse when I was a child. It collapsed after 2 weeks, but he said it was a complete disaster, and we laughed about it for years. I looked at that 10-year-old girl with her dirty knees and bright eyes and wondered, how long had she been buried under expectations that weren't hers? When I returned inside, Grandma had already put a kettle on the stove. She moved slowly, but her actions were determined. "Did you know?" she said. "Walter started planning that research annex 5 years ago, even before he got sick." I looked at her, surprised. "He told me he wanted you to have a space where you didn't need permission to be yourself." I felt the tears before they came. Silent, clean, no tremor, just falling. That night I stayed in my old room for the first time in years. The wallpaper was faded, the mattress was too soft, but the ceiling still had those glow-in-the-dark stars. Grandpa helped me glue them on when I was 9. I made Grandpa arrange everything scientifically, in precise constellations. He never questioned it. As I lay there, I realized something. The house no longer seemed haunted. Now, it seemed restored. The next morning, I made us both coffee and brought it to the kitchen table, the same one I usually avoided when my parents visited. Grandma folded the newspaper and gave me a tired but warm smile. "What now?" she asked. "I think I'll see," I replied. "The annex, the lab," she said, nodding. "He'd like that." I looked out the window. The sunlight shone softly on the magnolia branches. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to run, prove myself, or explain myself. I didn't feel invisible. More than money or an inheritance, this was the first real gift I'd received from this family. The only person who truly believed in me left something greater than a legacy. He gave me permission to start over. When I first saw the annex, it didn't look like a laboratory. It looked like a converted barn. And that's exactly what it was. At the end of a dusty road near Laurel Creek, the building had wide beams, a tin roof, and double doors that looked like they belonged in a horse stable rather than a research center. But inside, it was magical. The space had been completely renovated. Glass panels covered the east wall, allowing natural light to flood in. Tables were arranged with pristine lab equipment, microscopes, centrifuges, data tablets, and a 3D printer still wrapped in plastic. The shelves were filled with boxes, labeled with my name. In the center of the room was a workbench. On top of it lay my childhood notebook, the one I thought I'd lost in college. It still had torn pages, messy handwriting, and tiny diagrams of bee communication systems. My knees nearly buckled. Grandpa hadn't just built me a laboratory. He'd built my mind a home. Over the next few weeks, I moved into the annex full-time. I recruited 2 graduate students, Tara and Micah, friends from my undergraduate program, who shared the same stubborn hope that science could still be humane. We started small, a local grant for micro-irrigation research. Then, a partnership with a regional agricultural cooperative to test sustainable crop rotations. We made mistakes, burned equipment, cried over rejected grant proposals and broken data models. But we kept showing up every day. I was opening the doors to a place that didn't ask me for explanations. A place where ideas weren't ridiculed, just tested. A place where being intense or quiet, or very smart, wasn't something to apologize for. One afternoon, after a brutal funding rejection, I found myself alone in the annex. The others had gone home. The lights were off, and I was sitting on the floor near the storage closet, surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups. I reached into my purse and pulled out Grandpa's letter, the one I'd asked Mr. Keene to let me keep. I unfolded it and found the sentence I'd read 100 times. I whispered to the room, "You wrote your own paper." It wasn't just encouragement. It was instruction. That night I wrote a new proposal, not for another irrigation system, but for a youth-focused science program based in rural schools. We created the Little Scientist Project. The first year, we worked with only 12 students. They came from cities where the schools still used outdated textbooks, and no one had ever brought a microscope to class. We gave each child a leather notebook, a replica of mine, with grandfather's words printed on the first page. Write down the things they don't understand. One day the world will understand. One fall, a shy girl named Amber, just 13 and always with her hair in her face, showed me pages of observations she'd made on bee behavior. The calculations were clumsy, the grammar confusing, but her mind was brilliant. When I told her this, she looked at me as if I'd handed her a planet. "Did you really read it?" she whispered. I smiled. Of course I did. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't about replacing what I'd lost. It was about planting something new, in better soil, and letting it grow without fear. The email arrived 3 years after the will was read. It was from a lawyer, not Mr. Keene, but someone representing Vanessa Whitman. The subject line was short: Visitation request, Clare Whitman, Innovation, Annex. At first, I braced myself for legal trouble. I thought it would be another attempt to challenge the will, reopen some clause, or revive some chapter from the past we'd already buried. But when Vanessa arrived, I barely recognized her. The designer heels and perfectly coiffed hair were gone. She was makeup-free, wearing a navy blue coat that was too loose for her shoulders. She entered slowly, as if not wanting to take up space. I stood next to Grandpa's portrait above the reception desk. When she saw him, she stopped and said softly, "He always knew who you were, even when I didn't. Especially when I didn't." For a second, I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded. "Would you like to see?" she asked, looking around at the lab, the work, what I had done with what he had left me. I could have said no, but I didn't. I took her on a tour. We walked side by side through the greenhouse complexes, the crop development rooms, and the student display wall with photos of our little scientific initiative. She didn't say much, just asked simple, honest questions. "How do you fund all this? What is this device for? Can the kids publish their results?" When we reached the community garden, where local families grow food using our methods, she stopped. There were children harvesting lettuce, a mother and son laughing near the compost bins, and a father testing soil moisture with one of our field kits. Vanessa turned to me, and her voice breaking said, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted to see what he built for you and what you did with it." She didn't cry, but her hands kept moving, tugging at her sleeves and tracing invisible circles on the railing. I let her stay as long as she needed. No lectures, no retaliation, just the truth. We didn't talk much after that. But now, twice a year, Vanessa volunteers at the youth science camp. She helps students with presentation skills, such as explaining complicated data in plain English, and how to position themselves confidently. The kids love her. Some even call her Coach V. At the end of my first summer as a volunteer, she handed me a folder. I wrote a communication guide. "For shy kids," she said, almost embarrassed. I thought it might help. I opened the folder later that night. It wasn't perfect, but it was thoughtful, kind, real. And for the first time in my life, I saw a version of my sister that didn't scare me. She never apologized verbally, not directly, but somehow, she showed up. This was more than I expected. And maybe, just maybe, it's enough. We're not sisters like other people would like us to be, but in this little corner of a world, Grandpa dreamed of. We stopped pretending. And somehow, this is the beginning of something real. It's been 6 years since the reading of the will. 6 years since the front door slammed behind my parents and Vanessa, their footsteps echoing across the porch like the end of a performance no one applauded. I haven't spoken to my parents since. Sometimes I see their names in emails I don't open, in press releases from charities, or in financial articles from Florida. where they retired early. I don't hate them, but I don't miss them either. What I think about is work. The annex has grown into something beyond my imagination. What began as a converted barn is now a full-fledged research center. A campus, 4 laboratories, 3 greenhouses, and over 60 acres of test fields. We've developed drought-resistant seed varieties that now feed thousands of people in parts of the South where traditional crops fail. We've partnered with universities from Kenya to Brazil to share discoveries in agricultural regeneration. And last month, I took a stage in San Francisco to accept a national grant for climate innovation. The lights were bright, but I wasn't intimidated. I wore a navy suit and Grandpa's pocket watch, hidden in my shirt pocket. The one Grandma gave me last year. Her initials almost faded. Inside the lid, a small photo of me, 10 years old, stood proudly next to my first bee communication diagram, grinning from ear to ear. He carried this every day, Grandma said. Now, it sits on my desk in the annex, right where the morning light hits, casting small circles of glow over my research notes. Some days, I talk to him, not with words, just silently. When an experiment fails, when a student from the program wins a scholarship, when I remember how close I came to believing I didn't matter. He never let me disappear, not at all. And now I understand why. Legacy is not a monument, it's a map. A map made of choices, acts of kindness, and small anchors left behind for someone to follow when the world tries to erase those traces. Today, Grandma lives in a small apartment connected to my house in the city. She's slower, more forgetful, but still more perceptive than anyone I know. She knows when something is important. We have coffee every morning in the living room. She tells me stories about Grandpa I'd never heard. How he planted a tree just to propose. How he believed the earth could remind me of kindness. How he always knew I'd come back. And maybe he was right. Maybe I had to leave to understand what it would mean to return. Some nights, I'd walk across the annex fields, past the solar irrigation test beds and the children's gardens, to the old wooden bench Grandpa built by hand. From there, I could see the stars. The real ones, not the glow-in-the-dark ones I'd glued to my bedroom ceiling. But they still reminded me of that girl I was, the one who kept asking why, even when no one cared to answer, the one who refused to be quiet, the one he believed in. And on nights like this, when the wind blows through the trees, I swear I can hear his voice in the leaves. Write the things they don't understand. One day, the world will understand. And now, finally, he understands.